ערב
evening,
טוב לכולם.
everybody. And I'm very happy to open the second panel or session. Again, navigating between Antiquities, Nationality, and Sanctity in Jerusalem. Beforehand, there were a few remarks of the group before, Yonathan Mizrachi and the group headed by them. And I'm Yoni Mendel, and I head the group for Palestinian-Israeli relationships. We were very happy to host the Emek Shaveh team that dealt with alternative thinking regarding the situation and preservation of antiquities and all the issues that are related to that in East Jerusalem. And now, let's go back to the vision of Van Leer's vision 959. One of the objectives of the Institute is to define and to mold public debate in Israel and to pinpoint alternative thinking with regards to issues, the burning issues on the Israeli agenda. East Jerusalem Antiquities, managing antiquities, things that have to do with sanctity, things that are very political on the other hand, and they are on the top of the priority list of the public agenda. And we are very happy to promote such issues and to assist in any way. And I help my companions from the Van Leer Institute and the members of Emek Shaveh. We at the Center for the Palestinian-Israel relations deal with the Arabic language. I deal in that. But also we deal with the whole issue of Jerusalem. And I think the fact that one of the people was not present in the first panel reminds me of something in the past, that every time I see the road that was built along the Bet Safafa village with 6 lanes that actually cut through the village, we held a discussion about it. We invited 24 members from the Ministry of Transportation, from the Moria Company, from the municipality, and we didn't find any rep that would come and explain why this road was built next to that village. Maybe I'm a little innocent. I think it's the obligation of the authorities to come and explain, to discuss with the civilians, with civil society, with the residents of the area. And I do hope that the Antiquity Authority will also find a way to deal and discuss this very important paper. So now we will move over to a very important topic that is related to that triangle of archaeology, sanctity, and tourism. And we called the session Jerusalem All Included, Sanctity, Tourists, and Residents. And this is my final minute, and I'll give you the floor. But again, there was a bill from 2010 of Member Knesset Gideon Ezra of blessed memory, Uri Ariel from the Jewish Home, Kamer Shama from the Likud, Dani Danon of the Likud party as well, who is the ambassador in the UN today, Shama is the UNESCO ambassador, and Mr. Yechieli from Shas, and it's called the Tourism Service Bill. And it basically says that an agency giving tourism services where at least 11 tourists participate will make sure that the tour will be guided by an Israeli citizen and authorized tour guide. And again, in all such visits, should be conducted by an Israeli citizen who is an authorized tour guide, because in Jerusalem there are many sites of great value. Oftentimes there's dispute regarding the value of the sites, the status of the sites, and that is why it is important to have an authorized tour guide. For example, status of East Jerusalem have a double loyalty. Sometimes they present anti-Israeli opinions to foreigners, and this is extremely difficult. That is why Israel has to make sure that all official tour visits are again guided by an authorized Israeli tour guide that would present a different point of view. Again, this hasn't passed yet, this bill. But you could see that there is a dispute. There's a fight over the narrative and to what extent Jerusalem is in the center of this dispute. I do hope that the speakers will help us understand to what extent this is true and what can be done. And let's continue, and I'll introduce the first speaker. You each have 15 minutes, by the way. And this will give us about half hour of interesting discussion. The first speaker would be Mr. Yonathan Mizrachi. Yonatan is an archaeologist. He's the CEO of the Emek Shaveh Association. He dealt with the connection between politics, archaeology, and the impact of archaeology on Israeli identity and civil society. He worked in the Antiquities Authority in the past and in various excavations of the different universities in Israel. He also deals with archaeological excavations in the community, of the objective of which is partnership between the archaeologist and the community. Please, Mr. Mizrachi. Thank you so much. Thank you for all those who came. Thank you to the Van Leer Institute, who's hosting us today and will host us throughout the year in our thinking tank, and Yoni Mendel, who has accompanied us for quite some time. I will talk about a survey that we conducted, or we try to understand what Israelis and Palestinians think. Again, this was done among the Israelis, that is true, but it was also done among Palestinians who are residents of East Jerusalem. What do they think about archaeology? What do they think of Temple Mount? And this survey, the idea was as follows. Because as you might understand, everybody has his or her opinion about archaeology, and also even in our organization, association, people have different opinions. It's either archaeology is of no interest whatsoever, all the way to archaeology is the most important thing in the world. So there are all sorts of questions of what people think about archaeology, how it's related to Jerusalem, the activities in Jerusalem and such. So we first wanted to see and find out how many people come to Jerusalem and why they come to Jerusalem. So the survey showed us that most of the Israelis arrive in Jerusalem. Something like 96% have visited Jerusalem, at least like once a year or once every 2 or 3 years. Again, we checked this out, and then we wanted to understand, why do they come to Jerusalem? And the assumption was, why should people come to Jerusalem? It was said before, maybe the Western Wall, maybe the Knesset, maybe they want to go to Yad Vashem. And we actually found out that those who visit Jerusalem, again, many visit excavations or antiquities. And it shows us that archaeology plays a very important role in the minds of those who visit Jerusalem. It's not always convenient to get to those archaeological sites, but they still go there. It's usually more archaeological sites that are near the Western Walls, the David City, the Western Wall tunnels, that about 40% visit those sites. And there are many other sites that are very attractive. Again, with not so many visits, but it's interesting, like the Davidson Center, for example, that is between David City and the Western Wall tunnels. I think something like 14 or 15% visit that site. 9%, which is also interesting, generally speaking. I'm not sure it's because that one side is more interesting than the other. Maybe this relates to what Ilanit said before, but generally speaking, you can see that Israelis like visiting antiquities, archaeological sites, and that is how they identify Jerusalem, which is interesting, because we thought that Jerusalem is usually identified, through the religious hue, but apparently not so. Then we wanted to understand, how do people perceive these archaeological excavations? And the first interesting statistic that you can see here on the graph, that 80% of Israelis think that archaeological excavations are for scientific purposes, or scientific excavations, let's call them such. And we understood it as follows, to relate to it as a scientific excavation means that the Israeli authorities, which I trust, actually are doing their job well. The second thing it means is that there's no politics in excavation, but it's all about science. That is the Israeli perception, it seems. And the third thing is, we are Western society, and we act according to Western standards and benchmarks with respect to archaeology and excavations. When we ask the Arabs of East Jerusalem how they perceive archaeological excavations, we can see that, people actually could give more than one answer, by the way. And more than 50% said that archaeological activity is done either to strengthen Jewish hold over the city, or to erase Muslim past, or to erase any past which is not Jewish? And they all answered these questions. So Israelis perceived as a culture as not something problematic, as a science. Okay, 80% said so. By the way, 80% includes Israeli Arabs. Among Jews, the percentage is even higher. Among the Palestinians, residents of East Jerusalem, archaeology is perceived as a problem, raising identity or something else. And when we talk about conflicts and problems, sometimes you have to remember that what we may not perceive as a problem, the other side does perceive as a problem. And in order to solve the problems, you have to know what the problems are. Yes, thanks for asking about the survey. It was done by the Smith Institute, which is a survey company well known in Israel. It was... as far as the Israelis are concerned, again, there were 500 Israelis, that's what the subjects, and with East Jerusalem it was a little more difficult to find, only 150 answered the survey. And we wanted to, deal with the question of sanctity and archaeology, and I think you can always separate the two. Sometimes sites are both archaeological and sacred or holy, but we asked the Israelis and the Arabs of East Jerusalem, who is responsible for these sites? Who does it have to be? For example, I take the Western Wall, and there's archaeological site. Who must be responsible for the antiquities over there? So 66% of the Israelis think that some archaeological body like the Antiquities Authority or some other body has to preserve and maintain the archaeological artifacts, whether the site is holy, sacred or not. Among the East Jerusalem crowd, it was a little different. There wasn't an absolute answer, but what was interesting was the answer of the Israelis, because when we asked the Israelis this question, I don't know how many of them thought about Temple Mount and how many thought of the Western Wall. And if it actually somehow was interwoven in the answer, meaning to treat archaeological sites in the Temple Mount, do you need the Antiquities Authority or not? We didn't ask it, unfortunately. If we would have asked it more, concretely, what about the Western Wall? Must it be the Antiquities Authority or the Society for the Western Wall preservation? But again, most Israelis want some sort of archaeological body to maintain or to protect the site. And you can see this in the answer and the percentages that I gave you. Then we try to understand what is Haram Asharif, which is Temple Mount, and what does it mean to Israelis and Palestinians. I'll begin with the Palestinians because 91% of Palestinians see it as a holy site, Temple Mount, Haram Asharif. But among the Israelis, and this is interesting, it's true that 53% see it as a holy site, and then it somehow divides up, segments into historical sites and national site. But what is interesting is who sees it as a holy site and who doesn't. 97% of all the ultra-Orthodox see it as a holy site, 93% of the national religious, and 67% of the traditional Jews see it as a holy site. And of course, the sanctity of the site goes with faith. And it's interesting that among the secular, only 25% see it as a holy site. I think that this is interesting in terms of the debate or the narrative, because we often hear about settlers going up to Temple Mount. But if all the others again see it as holy site, there's expectation is that everybody would be going to Temple Mount, but maybe it's a national site or a historical site. That is how I prefer seeing it. And this is also interesting in itself. And we asked ourselves the question, we asked different populations among the Israelis and the Palestinians, but we asked, some questions were only asked of the Palestinians, and we tried to understand among the Arabs of East Jerusalem is what disturbs them, what is concerning. I already presented Emek Shaveh Association in the previous session. We deal in archaeology. This is what is of interest to us. But if before the survey you were to ask us what is the most significant thing in the conflict and what is the most significant, of course, archaeology is a central thing. And then you can say that the survey, which I will explain in just a moment, is biased. However, I think this is the first time that a survey deals with the question, to what extent do these excavations concern the residents of East Jerusalem? And what about beyond the concrete questions of preventing building, demolishing homes, not investing in infrastructure? Are these things more important? I know there are human rights activists here. We didn't ask all sorts of questions that concern them, like barriers, like checkpoints, not enough housing, not enough classrooms. We didn't ask. Maybe if we had asked there, about the classroom, that would have come up first. That would have been the most concerning issue. But I still want to say as follows, that if I were to look at the survey, then 67% of the Palestinians claim that what is most concerning is, again, Jews going up to Temple Mount. It disturbs them, it concerns them more than the lack of investment in infrastructure and not building enough in East Jerusalem, according to our survey. At any rate, the second thing that concerns them is the archaeological excavations, and I think this connects to the other question, the previous question of how is archaeological excavation perceived. So again, as far as the residents of East Jerusalem are concerned, there's no difference between the different sites. And I don't want to be presumptuous, but if I want to say something about the perception of East Jerusalem, oftentimes it is claimed as follows, among activists I hear this, that the minute we improve infrastructure in East Jerusalem and the minute we improve life in East Jerusalem, we will solve the problem. But I think that this survey, first of all, shows, I see archaeological excavation as such, that it's activity that is related to identity, how we characterize the identity of a place, how we present the site, what kind of city do we have. The city of Jerusalem in which Jews go up to Temple Mount, and if we conduct archaeological excavations to erase a different history and to only strengthen Jewish identity, then this is a city that ignores heritage and the identity of various residents of the city and the connection to the city. I think as far as they are concerned, that is the central issue. And the survey, or at least according to my analysis, and I conducted this analysis, the survey actually shows us that questions of identity and affiliation or connection, so it seems the central questions that still concern the residents of East Jerusalem, or again residents that are under this very complex reality in the east part of the city, and especially when we talk about conflicts, I think it's so easy to talk about, to take the economic debate, that if we invest a little more, I'm not saying there's no problem of infrastructure, severe problem of infrastructure in Jerusalem, undoubtedly there is, but I think that at the end of the day, how Jerusalem is perceived and how it is preserved and how it is maintained and how it is designed or molded, that is something very central. I would say it is the most central issue, but it's very central in terms of the conflict in which we find ourselves. And that is why archaeological activity, or at least the Antiquities Authority, in the forefront, and other bodies have a huge impact on life in East Jerusalem, way beyond the old city, and definitely it impacts the feelings of the residents. These are our conclusions.